Good everyone, I hope you're having an amazing day. So today I'll be talking about dynamic Soql and dynamic Sosl, right? It's a part of a dynamic Apex. We'll be talking at this stage, right? Now you must be wondering, you must have used this. Okay, let me give you a very simple example. Say if I wanted to get, say, an ID from an account. So normally you tend to do something like this, right? List of account, say AC list equals to um, select ID from account. Pretty straightforward, right? Nothing fancy about it. Um, that being said, so right, this kind of scenario works fine in a normal, if you wanted to target a specific object. But if you're building an enterprise level solution, right, you shouldn't be hard coding your Soql in, what I mean by hard coding, you shouldn't be writing something like this, right? It's not really great practice because then you're restricting your Soql query operation to a specific object, right? So if you have seen a financial force lib framework, right, it's very well designed enterprise parent, right? I'm pretty impressed with the way that's been designed, right? Now, if you don't want to follow the financial force lib part, that's fine. But if you wanted to build a separation of concern, right? If you wanted to build a selector layer, what I meant by selector layer is the layer which does all your database operation. Then you should restrain from doing something like that. Instead, you can create a dynamic query. So, for instance, let me give you a very classic example. So you have something like uh, let let me rewrite the same query using a dynamic query, right? So we'll say select account Soql. So this can go under constant class. So I can do select ID from account. Now I will tell you the problem at the same time with this approach, right? So now I will say list of S object, okay, and you're gonna say object list, okay, equals to, I will say database dot query, right? And I can do this one, right? So this will pretty much give you an information about how to get any query using a dynamic query. So in this case, this is pretty generic, right? So I can pretty much do this, say, if I have a code something like this, right? I can also pass, say if I have a method, say private, say I would say void, right? If I say, parse Soql, right? String, Soql query, right? So you can pretty much use this method as a generic one, right? So instead of using ID from account, you can pass something else from an opportunity, from another custom object, or from contact, right? You can do pretty much whatever you want to do. So that's great, right? So this is a very good way if you wanted to use a separation of concern principles and wanted to split out your extraction layer. That's the database layer. Now, the problem with this approach, right? Say I write this stuff here, right? So if I do select the list of account, and I'll do ACC list, like I said before. So we got select ID from account, right? So now compare to this approach, right? And then compare to this approach and to the above approach, right? So if by mistake, right, you do a typo, something like this, right? When you try to save your class file, it will save without indicating because there is no compile time checking when it comes to a string, right? Unless you do something like this, right? If you then obviously it will give compile time, but during the compile time, right? The compiler won't really know whether you've written the right Soql query. But whereas in this case, it will complain, right? If you do something like this, it will complain when you try to save it. So that's one of the caveat you have to keep into consideration when you are dealing with this dynamic Soql, right? But that being said, dynamic Soql is very powerful. It will let you build a generic selection layer, right? Now, you also do need to keep into consideration about the SQL injection, where try to sneak in, using special characters and other stuff, right? So, in Salesforce, right? I mean, I've dealt with the SQL injection in general when I used to work on a SQL Server environment. Um, and with the .NET, right? So I have to make sure that I write my query in such a way, or to store procedures in such a way, so that someone, you know, not, so that I don't give an opportunity to someone to do a SOQL or SQL injection, right? So in Salesforce side, right, to prevent SOQL injection, use escape single quote method, right? So that will take care of it. Okay, so that's around when we talking about um, something around dynamic Soql. We have something called dynamic Sosl, right? That's a so if you wanted to query using Sosl, you can do that as well, right? Say normally, so for instance, I'll give you a very simple example. So you're gonna have a string query equals to. So normally you do find, right? I just find find say this say Dave, whatever, right? I'm just trying to um, search something start with Dave, right? And then I will close it. um, I think it's in all fields returning uh, account. Yeah, we're just going to say ID, name, and contact, right? And then you can do something like list of you have to, because we're dealing with multiple objects. So as object, you can see this. You can say search list, okay, equals to. Now, in this case, pay attention, right? We're not actually calling database dot query. Instead, we can call search dot query, right? And then you find the query string. So this is more around the dynamic Sosl. I mean, like I said, like similar analogy what I've given to you for dynamics Soql. So I will give the similar analogy for this one as well, right? If you wanted to build a separation of concern layer or a selection layer, then you go for this approach, right? Because instead of hard coding, your class specific to say account, to an opportunity, or to a contact, or to lead, or whatever, right? It's better to build a generic um, query layer, then you can use that for any object, right? So that comes as a part of a design pattern, right? That's why I always encourage when people wanted to get into Salesforce, I tell them to not to just go with the flow, right? Because that's just a bad approach. Try to find the best technique out there, right? Try to find out the design pattern. That's why I have a lot of respect for people who comes from a Java background or .NET background into Salesforce. They do extremely well when it comes to the code side of things because they bring those enterprise level coding experience, right? Because in C Sharp we use design pattern extensively, Java we use it, right? And when these people come to this technology, they bring it together, right? So that's one of the reasons why I always suggest, right, when you work on the Apex side of things, try to think from a design perspective, right? Just don't learn APIC just because you wanted to, write some piece of a code out there. That's just a bad attitude and a very bad way of looking at stuff. That's why I'm sorry to say I've seen Salesforce have a lot of crap code in place, right? People, because Salesforce is in high demand, right? So they don't scrutinize people enough in a very good way. They just bring someone, oh yeah, you can code, just come and work on the team, right? That's just the wrong approach, in my opinion. I mean, I'd rather prefer to train a .NET developer rather than getting a fresh Salesforce developer who has never programmed. Someone who has worked some kind of .NET developer experience that can learn pretty well, right? Can bring that experience to it. So that's my perception. You can disagree. So this is similar to Soql I talked about, right? You can avoid Soql injection by Sosl injection by using escape single quote method because it can be prone to Sosl injection, which is a critical thing because people take this thing lightly, but you shouldn't be because someone can get into the damn thing and wipe out the data, right? Imagine that would be disaster. So you have to write your code in such a way that so it's not prone to Sosl or Soql injection, right? So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today in terms of dynamic Soql and Sosl. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. This is an important part of platform developer to certification. So I do expect you spend some time reading about it and play around with it. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk. So you guys have an amazing day. Take care. Adios.